My daughter planned the most expensive corporate launch party of her career and invited every person who mattered in her world. Every investor, every client, every colleague who had ever handed her a business card. She did not invite me. When I asked why, she said I would make things awkward, that a retired pipefitter with grease under his fingernails had no place at an event like that. I didn't argue. I just nodded and told her I understood. What I didn't tell her was that the venue she had booked for her big night, the one she found online and called the most impressive space in all of Edmonton, was a building I had owned for 11 years. I want to be clear about something before I go any further. I am not telling this story to make myself look good. I am telling it because I spent 3 years watching my daughter become someone I didn't recognize, and I need people to understand how it happens. How slowly, how quietly, how you can lose a child not to tragedy but to ambition, and how you don't even see it coming until the moment you're standing in your own kitchen, listening to her explain why your presence would be a liability. Her name is Brooke. She is 34 years old. She has her mother's eyes, and my stubbornness. And somewhere along the way, she developed a third quality that belonged to neither of us. This hunger for a version of success that required the right backdrop, the right clothes, the right people, and no trace of where she came from. Her mother, Janet, died 6 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 14 months from diagnosis to the end. I held her hand through every treatment, drove 3 hours each way to the specialist in Calgary, slept in hospital chairs more nights than I can count. Brooke was there too, in the beginning. Then her startup started gaining traction, and the visits got shorter and further apart, and by the time Janet passed, my daughter had not been home in 6 weeks. She cried at the funeral. I believed her grief was real. I still do. But grief and guilt are different things, and I think what Brooke carried out of that cemetery was more of the second than the first. I sold the house Janet and I had shared for 27 years, about 8 months after she died. Couldn't stay in it. Every room held something I wasn't ready to look at. I moved into a rental in Street, Albert, and went back to work, not because I needed to financially, though Brooke did not know that, but because I needed somewhere to put my hands. Here's what my daughter believed about me at that point. She believed I had worked 31 years as a pipefitter, retired on a modest pension, sold the family home, and used the proceeds to rent a small place and live simply while my savings slowly drained. That belief was accurate in every surface detail, and completely wrong in the ways that mattered. What Brooke did not know, what I had never told her or anyone outside my attorney and my accountant, was what Janet and I had done with the money we didn't spend during 30 years of living carefully. We invested in real estate, quietly, nothing flashy. Industrial properties, a few commercial buildings, storage facilities. We were not developers. We were not flippers. We were patient people who bought undervalued assets and held them through the slow cycles and sold when it made sense and reinvested. By the time Janet got sick, we had 11 properties across Alberta. After she died, I liquidated 4 of them and consolidated into 7. One of those 7 was a converted warehouse space in the Quarters district of Edmonton that a property management company had been leasing to corporate event clients for the past decade. A beautiful space. Exposed brick, 15-foot ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows along the south wall. Janet had loved it. She used to drive past it on the way to her sister's place and tell me it looked like somewhere important things happened. My daughter found it online in January. She called me, excited in a way I hadn't heard in months. Dad, I found the perfect venue for the launch. It's in the Quarters. This incredible converted warehouse. Very industrial chic. It fits 200 people. The acoustics are amazing. It photographs beautifully. I think it's going to be incredible. I knew the exact space she was describing before she finished the sentence. That's wonderful, I said. Tell me about the launch. She told me. Her company, an AI-driven logistics platform she had been building for 4 years, had just closed a Series B funding round, $7.2 million. The launch event was meant to announce the company's next phase, welcome the new investors, and position Brooke as a serious player in the Edmonton tech scene. 200 guests, catered, live music, a brand presentation she'd been working on for 3 months. She wanted it to feel, her word, transformational. I asked when it was scheduled. March 14th, a Friday evening. I told her it sounded like she had worked incredibly hard and deserved to celebrate it. That was true. She had worked incredibly hard. Whatever else I felt about the choices she had made in recent years, that part was never in question. She hesitated then, the way she does when she's about to ask for something and has rehearsed how to frame it. Dad, the venue deposit is due this week. We're still waiting on the investment funds to clear, and it's a timing thing, not a cash flow issue, more of a bridge situation. I was wondering if you might be able to help just temporarily. How much is the deposit? 18,000. I asked how many days the bridge would cover. She said 3 weeks at most. I told her I would transfer it the next morning. The relief in her voice was immediate and complete. It moved past thank you into something else, something that sounded like a problem resolved rather than a gift received. She moved straight into logistics. I'll send you the venue's banking information tonight. This really means a lot, Dad. I'll pay you back the moment the funds clear, I promise. I told her not to worry about it. She sent me the deposit information 40 minutes later. I transferred the money the following morning, as promised. The account details she sent were for Copper Hall Events, the corporate name my property management company operated under for that building. She had wired her father's deposit to her father's account without having any idea. I did not tell her. Not then. I want to explain why I kept quiet for so long. People hear a story like this and assume the silence was strategic from the start, that I was already planning the reveal, building toward a moment. That is not how it felt from the inside. From the inside, it felt like grief. Specifically, like the kind of grief that comes not from loss, but from slowly understanding that the loss already happened and you were the last one to notice. I had been watching Brooke change for 3 years. Small things at first. The way she described her childhood differently at networking events, making it vaguer, softer, less specific. No more mention of the house and street. Albert, the backyard rink her mother and I built every winter. The summers driving to Jasper in my truck with the windows down. Those stories got replaced by something more portable, a version of herself that could have come from anywhere and therefore fit anywhere. Then came the visit 2 years ago when she brought a colleague home for Thanksgiving. I cooked. The colleague was polished, privately educated, had opinions about wine regions I had never visited. Over dinner, he asked what I had done for work. I told him, Pipefitter, 31 years, mostly industrial sites across northern Alberta. There was a pause. The colleague said, "Oh, that's real work," with that particular tone people use when they mean the opposite. Brooke changed the subject quickly. Later, helping me clean up, she said, "Dad, you don't have to give people your whole resume right away." I said I thought he asked. She said, "I know, just maybe keep it brief next time." I noticed something shift behind her eyes when she said it. Not cruelty, discomfort, which is its own kind of hurt. After that visit, the calls got shorter. The length of time between them grew. She came home for Christmas, but left the day after. Said she had investor meetings in the new year she needed to prepare for. She started describing herself in interviews as self-made, which technically was true and also left out the parents who had put her through university debt-free and supported every early decision she had made. I missed her. That is the plain truth. I missed the version of her that existed before all of this started. I kept hoping I would say something or do something that would remind her of who we had been to each other before ambition put so much distance between us. But I couldn't figure out what that thing was, and eventually I stopped trying to figure it out and just waited. Then, a month before the launch event, she called me on a Wednesday afternoon. I was doing some work on my rental property, patching drywall, the kind of physical task I still find useful when I have something to think through. I answered with paint on my hands. "Dad, hi, the event is coming together really well. I wanted to loop you in." I said I was glad to hear it. She said she was at around 180 confirmed guests, that the caterer had done a site visit and loved the space, that the lighting design was almost finalized. And then she said the thing I had been bracing for, without knowing I was bracing for it. "I've been thinking about the guest list, and I want to be upfront with you about this, because I think it's better than you hearing about it another way. This event is really a professional occasion. Everyone there will be investors, clients, industry contacts. It's not really a family night. So I wasn't planning on including you on the list, and I didn't want you to just not receive an invitation and wonder why." I held the phone against my ear and looked at the patch of drywall I had been working on. "I see," I said. "It's nothing personal. It's just that it's a professional context, and I want to be intentional about who's in the room. You'd probably find it pretty boring, honestly. A lot of tech talk. I told her I appreciated her being upfront. She sounded relieved. I knew she had rehearsed that explanation, probably multiple versions of it. The one she chose was the gentlest available, and I respected the effort even while feeling the weight of what she was actually saying. You do not fit this room. You are not the version of me I am showing tonight. I set down my phone after we hung up and sat on the floor of the room I was patching, my back against the wall, looking at nothing for a while. Janet. I thought about Janet the whole time. About the woman who had worked reception at a dental office for 19 years and invested every spare dollar with quiet discipline and never once suggested that where you came from was something to be managed. About the version of our daughter that woman had raised. About the distance between that version and the one on the phone. I called my attorney the next day. Not to plan anything dramatic, just to think things through with someone I trusted. His name is Dennis, and he has handled my affairs for 18 years. He is steady and methodical, and when I told him the situation, including the part about the venue being my property, he was quiet for a long moment, and then said, "Well, just that. Well, I told him I was planning to attend the event. He said legally that was entirely my right. More than my right. I was the property owner. The tenant, meaning my own daughter's company, had booked the space for the evening, but the owner retained right of access under the terms of the lease agreement, specifically for inspection and emergency purposes, and showing up was not something anyone could legally prevent. We talked through what that might look like. I told him I didn't want to cause a scene. I didn't want to humiliate Brooke in front of 200 people in a way she couldn't recover from. I wanted her to understand what she had done. Those are different things, and the line between them required some thought. Dennis said he would come with me. He said it without being asked, in the tone he uses when something matters and he's decided. In the 6 weeks between that phone call and March 14th, I bought a suit. I hadn't owned one in years. I found a good tailor in downtown Edmonton, a quiet man named no one I'll name here, who fitted me properly and didn't ask questions. Navy blue, nothing flashy, the kind of suit you wear when you want to be taken seriously rather than noticed. I also told my property manager to keep my attendance confidential from the event staff. They knew me as the building owner. They did not know my relationship to the company renting the space that evening. I asked that it stay that way until I chose to address it. March 14th arrived cold and clear. Alberta, in early spring. The sky, that particular shade of blue that only happens when the temperature is still below zero and there's no humidity in the air. I dressed at home, slowly, the way I used to when Janet would watch from the doorway and tell me I cleaned up well. I straightened my tie in the mirror and let myself feel the weight of the evening ahead. Dennis met me outside the building at 7:15. The event started at 7. Through the tall, south-facing windows, I could see the room already filling, warm light, the hum of a crowd in good spirits. Catering staff moving efficiently along the edges. A presentation screen at the far end, displaying my daughter's company logo in clean white letters. We walked in through the main entrance. The event coordinator recognized me immediately from our previous site visits. She came forward with the particular expression of someone holding two contradictory pieces of information in their head at once. She greeted me by my name, the right name, and I watched the small moment of confusion cross the face of the woman standing beside her, one of Brooke's team members I had seen in photographs. I asked the coordinator quietly if everything was running smoothly. She said yes, perfectly. I thanked her and moved into the room. I want to describe what it felt like to walk through that space. I had been inside it dozens of times. I had approved the renovation that put in those south windows. I had chosen the reclaimed wood for the bar surface. I knew the exact pitch of those ceilings, the way sound moved in the room, the cold spot near the northwest corner that we'd had the HVAC team assess twice. And now it was filled with 200 people celebrating my daughter's success, and not a single one of them knew I existed. I recognized a few faces. 2 investors I had met years ago at a Chamber of Commerce event, back when I was still attending such things as myself rather than as a retired pipefitter. A commercial real estate broker I had worked with on the building's original purchase. They saw me across the room and I could watch the recognition settling in, the slight confusion about context, the beginning of a mental recalibration. I found a spot near the bar and waited. Dennis stood nearby, quiet and present, exactly as useful as I needed him to be. Brooke was at the center of the room, moving between clusters of guests with that focused energy she carries when she's working a crowd. She was good at it, genuinely good, confident without being aggressive, warm without being performative. She had built something real, and she knew how to talk about it, and watching her, even in that moment, I felt proud of her in a way that made the evening harder, not easier. She didn't see me for the first 40 minutes. The room was full, and I stayed near the periphery. Then the formal program began. The lights shifted. The crowd gathered toward the presentation area, and I moved with them, closer to the front. A colleague of hers, their head of marketing, introduced the company, gave context for the evening, set up Brooke's address. Then Brooke took the microphone. She was poised. She thanked the investors, thanked her team, acknowledged the journey of the past 4 years. She talked about the company's mission, about what this funding round meant for their next phase, about Edmonton's growing position in the national tech landscape. She was articulate and prepared and genuinely moving at moments. Near the end of her remarks, she gestured at the room itself. And I have to say, she told the crowd, this venue. When I found this space online, I knew immediately it was where this moment needed to happen. There's something about a place like this, something that feels earned, industrial, real, like where actual work gets done. She smiled. The crowd appreciated it. I stepped forward. I didn't raise my voice. The room's acoustics, the ones I had specifically preserved in the renovation, carried clearly. I'm glad you feel that way, I said. I've always thought so too. 200 heads turned. Brooke found me in the crowd, and I watched her face pass through confusion, disbelief, and something I can only describe as a very old kind of fear, the kind that is not about danger, but about being seen. I walked toward the front of the room. People moved aside not because they knew who I was, but because something in the way I moved told them I belonged there. My name is Roy Callahan, I said, speaking to the room but looking at my daughter. I own this building. Have for 11 years. My wife Janet and I purchased it together. She loved it, said it looked like somewhere important things happened. The room was absolutely still. I am also Brooke's father, the retired pipefitter. She didn't invite tonight because she thought I'd make things awkward in a room full of important people. I paused, not for effect, because I needed a moment. Her mother and I never made much noise about what we had built. We lived on my tradesman's salary for 30 years and invested everything else quietly, the way people do when they grew up without money and take seriously the responsibility of having some. We were not flashy people. We did not need to be recognized, but we were present. We showed up for every school play, every hard conversation, every 2 a.m. The phone call when something fell apart. I looked at Brooke directly. Her eyes were bright. I could not tell yet what she was feeling. I didn't come tonight to embarrass you, I said. I came because I was not willing to be erased. Not from this room, and not from your story. One of the investors near the front, an older man with the bearing of someone who had seen many rooms turn, was watching me carefully. I recognized him from a conference in Calgary 7 years ago. He recognized me at the same moment. I recognized him, and I watched the information land. Someone near the back had already pulled out their phone. I could see the glow of a screen, someone searching, then another, the quiet ripple of a room recalibrating. Brooke's head of marketing, to his considerable credit, stepped forward and suggested a short intermission, which broke the formal stillness and let people move and absorb what had just happened. I did not stay for the intermission. I found Brooke at the edge of the room, away from the crowd. She had followed me there without either of us deciding to do it. We stood near the northwest corner, the cold spot, the one the HVAC team had never fully resolved. She said, "How long have you owned this building?" 11 years, I said. She said nothing for a moment. Then, did you know when I told you about the venue? Yes. She closed her eyes. The deposit, she said quietly, went into my account. I redirected it back to your event costs this afternoon. She opened her eyes. She looked at me the way she used to look at me when she was small and had done something she knew was wrong and was waiting to find out what came next. Not defiant, not performing, just present, finally, in the way I had missed for 3 years. I didn't do this to hurt you, I said. I did it because you made me invisible, and I needed you to understand what you were making invisible. Not just an embarrassing father. Everything we built, everything your mother was. She pressed her hand over her mouth. I watched her hold herself together with the particular effort of someone who does not want to cry in front of 200 people 30 feet away. Dad, she said finally, through her hand. I know, I said. I know. I left after that. Dennis drove me home. We didn't talk much in the car. He is that kind of friend. The weeks after the launch were not easy for Brooke, though I did not fully understand the extent of it until later. The investor who had recognized me reached out the following Monday, not to cause trouble, but to ask questions. He had known me, even slightly, from the Calgary conference. He knew enough to know that the picture Brooke had presented of her background was incomplete at best. He was not hostile. He was, however, a man who valued accuracy, and he let his questions be known to others in the room who had similar standards. There were conversations among the investor group, nothing catastrophic, no one pulled funding, but there was a recalibration of the kind that follows when you discover someone has been managing their image more carefully than their transparency. Brooke felt it. She described it to me later as a loss of altitude that she hadn't fully recovered from yet. Her team asked questions she couldn't answer cleanly. Why hadn't she mentioned her father was at the launch? Why hadn't she disclosed that she had a personal relationship with the property owner? None of it was illegal. All of it was uncomfortable. She called me 12 days after the event. I let it ring. I was not ready. She called again the next morning. I let that one ring too. On the third call, I answered. She said, "Can I come over?" I said, "Yes." She drove to Street Albert on a Saturday afternoon, arriving in her car that suddenly seemed like a choice she was reconsidering. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. She sat in my kitchen at the same table where she had eaten breakfast every morning for 18 years and wrapped her hands around a mug of tea and looked at the surface of the table for a long time before she spoke. She said, "I became someone Mom would not have recognized." I said, "Yes." She said, "I was ashamed of where I came from, not of you, specifically, of all of it. The house, the truck, the work. I wanted people to see me as something that had emerged from nowhere, fully formed, like my success was mine alone. And somewhere in that story, I made you into a liability." I let that sit in the room for a while. She said, "That is the worst thing I have ever done." I said, "It is close." She looked up. I said it without meanness, just plainly, because it was true. I told her what I told her next was not a negotiation, and not a list of conditions she could push back on. It was what was going to happen if we were going to find our way back to each other. She was going to be honest with her investors about her background. Not perform humility, not spin the story into something palatable. Just tell the truth. She came from a working family. Her parents had made quiet investments over decades. Her father owned the building she had launched her company in. All of that was true, and none of it diminished anything she had built. She was going to come home for more than holidays, not out of obligation. Because I was her father and I was 61 years old, and her mother was gone, and time was not abstract anymore. And she was going to visit the Susan Murray Community Foundation. I said that wrong. Let me correct it. She was going to visit the Janet Callahan Bursary, a fund I had established quietly at the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology after Janet died, designed to support students from trades, families pursuing technical education. Brooke had not known it existed. I told her about it that afternoon. Told her what her mother had wanted, that kids who grew up the way we had grown up should not have to choose between potential and debt. The bursary had supported 41 students in 5 years. Brooke cried when I told her about it. Not the controlled, managed emotion she had been carrying through the conversation. Something older and less careful than that. She said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, "Because I didn't think it would mean anything to the person you had become, and I wanted to wait until it would." She came back the following Saturday, and the one after that. Not dramatically. Just showed up, helped me fix the fence post that had been leaning since November, ate soup, stayed until it was dark. We talked about her mother. I showed her photographs Brooke had never seen. Janet in her 20s before we had anything. Janet at 40 standing in front of the Edmonton building the first time we looked at it together, her hand flat against the brick, already in love with it. In June, 3 months after the launch, Brooke stood up at a panel event for Edmonton tech founders and told the truth about her background. She talked about her father, the pipefitter, about her mother, the dental receptionist, about 30 years of quiet investment, about the building and the quarters that she had rented from her father without knowing. She did not make it sentimental. She made it factual. She said, "I tried to make myself into someone with no history, and all I did was make myself into someone without integrity." The room responded the way rooms do when someone says something true in public. The careful silence that is actually a kind of relief. I was not at the panel. She told me about it that Sunday over soup. I said, "Your mother would have been proud." She said, "I know. I'm working on deserving that." It is November now. 8 months since the launch. The bursary just announced its fall cohort. 12 new students. Brooke helped with the selection process. She sat across the table from kids who reminded her of who she used to be, before she decided that was something to outrun, and she asked them about their plans and listened to their answers, and did not look once at her phone. I drove home from that meeting in my truck, the same truck I have driven for 9 years because it does what I need it to do, and I have never needed a vehicle to say something on my behalf. The November sky was doing its thing, that hard, clear blue, and the city lights were just beginning to come on along the highway. "Janet," I said out loud in the cab, the way I still do sometimes. "I think she's finding her way back." The road was quiet and straight, and I kept driving north toward home, where the fence post was solid now and there was soup on the stove and my daughter was coming for dinner. I have thought a lot about what it actually means to raise someone well. Not the mechanics of it, the food and the school and the roof. The deeper thing, whether you manage to pass along some understanding of what a life is actually for. Janet and I believed we had done that. We lived modestly, not because we had no choice, but because we had made a deliberate one. And we tried to show Brooke, through the way we moved through the world, that a person's worth had nothing to do with what they looked like from the outside, that the work mattered, that the quiet accumulation of honest effort mattered, that showing up consistently, without applause, was not a lesser version of success. It was the whole point. And then I watched my daughter spend 3 years erasing us, and I had to sit with the hard question of whether we had actually passed any of that along, or whether we had just assumed she was absorbing it while she was busy learning something else entirely. What I came to understand, slowly, is that the choices we make catch up to us, not through punishment, not through any external force deciding it's time to settle accounts. They catch up to us because the world is built from real things, and real things have weight, and eventually the weight lands where it belongs. Brooke built a company in a building her father owned, and invited 200 people to celebrate what she had made without knowing she was standing in the middle of evidence of everything she had tried to leave behind. That was not justice delivered from outside. That was the shape of the truth asserting itself, in the only way truth knows how. What I did on March 14th was not revenge. I want to be clear about that. Revenge would have meant I wanted her to suffer. I wanted something different. I wanted her to see. There is a version of my daughter that had gone to sleep somewhere around the time ambition became more important than honesty, and I needed to wake that version up before it was too late to find her again. That required showing her something she could not argue with. Not my disappointment, not my hurt. The building, the deed. 41 students with Janet's name attached to their education. The facts of a life she had decided were too plain to claim. Integrity is not a quality you either have or don't. It is something you practice. And when you stop practicing it, it atrophies the way any unused thing does. Brooke had stopped practicing it gradually, making small compromises that each felt manageable until the accumulation of them had carried her somewhere she would not have recognized herself going. That is how it always happens. Not one large wrong turn. 100 small ones, each easy to justify, each making the next one easier. What I am proud of, looking back, is that I did not give up on her. Not because I was certain she could find her way back, but because I understood that my willingness to stay present was itself a form of teaching. That love which remains when it would be easier to walk away demonstrates something that no amount of explaining can. She needed to see that Roy Callahan, pipefitter, property owner, her father, was still standing there. Still solid. Still the same person he had always been, regardless of what she had decided to believe about him. She is finding her way back. I see it every Sunday at that kitchen table, in the way she listens now, in the patience she brings to the bursary students, in the particular look she gets when she talks about Janet. It is not complete. These things don't finish cleanly. But I know this. The version of Brooke her mother wanted to meet is still in there, still becoming herself. And that is enough to drive home on a clear November evening with soup on the stove and everything that matters still intact.